Forever Midnight, Part 3. Chapter 14, The Hollow Return. Eleanor sat motionless on the edge of the bed, her pulse pounding in her ears. The apartment was silent, but not in a comforting way. The kind of silence that stretched too long, like the house itself was waiting. Her fingers curled around the sheets as she stared at the black envelope lying on the wooden floor by the door. It shouldn't be there. It couldn't be there. But it was. She swallowed hard. The scent of dust and old paper filled her nose, blending with something fainter, something damp, like the scent of old stone. Like the manor. Her hands trembled as she reached forward. She hesitated just before touching it, expecting the envelope to vanish, to reveal itself as another cruel trick of her exhausted mind. But the paper was real. Smooth beneath her fingertips, wax sealed just like before. The same crest. The same eerie weight. A lump formed in her throat. She had made her choice. She had stepped through the door of light. She had left it behind. Hadn't she? Her fingers dug into the wax seal, peeling it away carefully. The envelope opened with a whisper of paper against paper. A single sheet was inside, the writing delicate, old-fashioned. The words made her blood run cold. Midnight awaits. The house remembers. The room seemed to shrink around her. Her breath came shallow, quick. No. No, this wasn't possible. A sudden pressure built in her skull, like something just outside her perception was trying to claw its way into her thoughts. And then, from the corner of her vision, a shadow moved. She jerked her head toward the mirror across the room, and her breath caught in her throat. Her reflection was wrong. The Eleanor in the mirror was not sitting, not trembling in panic. She was standing. Watching. A cruel smirk curled at the edges of her lips. And she spoke, though Eleanor's mouth never moved. Did you really think you could leave? Eleanor lurched backward, knocking over the bedside lamp. The glass shattered against the wooden floor, the light bulb popping with a sharp crack. Her reflection didn't flinch. It only laughed. Her stomach twisted. The sound was hers, but laced with something wrong. The lights in the room flickered. The walls creaked. And then, from the door, a knock. A slow, deliberate 3 taps. Eleanor's body locked in place. She didn't move. She didn't breathe. Another knock. Louder this time. She turned toward the door, the envelope still clutched in her hands. And the handle began to turn. No. She sprinted toward the door and slammed her hands against it, locking it shut. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. Silence. For one long, stretched moment, there was nothing but the sound of her own breath. Her fingers clenched against the wood, her knuckles turning white. Then, from the other side of the door, a whisper. Right at her ear. You left something behind. The lights in the apartment went out. A frigid gust of wind rushed through the room, sending papers flying, rattling the windows. The shadows on the walls stretched, growing longer, twisting into figures, tall, draped in black, their faces obscured. The door rattled violently. Eleanor stumbled back. Her reflection in the mirror no longer smirked. It watched. And then, behind her, the window cracked open, letting in a slow, creeping mist. And within it, the scent of Ravenshade Manor. The whisper came again, but this time, it came from inside the room. Welcome home, Eleanor. Chapter 15, The cycle begins again. Eleanor's breath came in short, panicked gasps. The whisper lingered in the air, curling around her like a phantom's touch. Welcome home, Eleanor. Her muscles locked, every nerve screaming at her to run, but she was trapped, boxed in between reality and nightmare. The wind clawed through the open window, carrying the damp scent of Ravenshade Manor, thick with the weight of forgotten time. The figures in the shadows loomed, twisting against the flickering remnants of the failing light. The whispering intensified, the voices overlapping, drowning her in a sound so familiar yet so deeply unsettling. She turned sharply toward the mirror. Her reflection was gone. Not standing. Not smirking. Just gone. A hollow pit of nausea formed in her stomach. The only thing left in the glass was the room behind her. And a dark figure standing just inches away. A choked scream ripped from Eleanor's throat as she spun around, but the room was empty. Nothing was there. Except. The door burst open. A freezing wind rushed in, snuffing out the last of the lights. The apartment shifted, as though the very walls were bending inward, reshaping themselves. And then. The wood beneath her feet changed. The scent of damp stone deepened. The air grew heavier, suffocating. She wasn't in her apartment anymore. She was standing in the grand hall of Ravenshade Manor. Her chest heaved. No, 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 this isn't real. The chandeliers above flickered weakly, their glow dim and unnatural. The portraits along the walls were empty, their gilded frames enclosing only black voids. The staircase loomed before her, stretching impossibly high, its steps veiled in thick, writhing mist. Eleanor backed away, heart hammering, but her foot hit something. A black envelope. Her breath caught. The same envelope. The same one. With shaking hands, she knelt down, picking it up as though it would crumble in her grasp. The wax seal gleamed under the dim light, unbroken, untouched. She didn't want to open it. She already knew what it would say. But her fingers moved on their own, tearing through the wax, unfolding the crisp parchment. The inked words were the same as before. Midnight awaits. The house remembers. A hollow, desperate sound escaped her lips, a laugh or a sob, she couldn't tell. Her vision blurred. The weight of the house pressed against her, filling her lungs, wrapping around her bones. She had never left. She had only restarted. A slow, rhythmic creaking echoed through the hall. The grandfather clock. Tick. 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 Her head turned toward the sound, dread sinking its claws deeper into her spine. The ancient clock stood at the far end of the hall, its hands still moving, but not forward. Backward. A single chime rang through the manor, shaking the air. Eleanor staggered. It was happening again. The shadows around her shifted. Moved. And then. A voice. "You are late, Miss Blackwood." The hairs on the back of her neck rose. The voice was low, rich, familiar. Too familiar. She turned slowly. And there he was. The masked man. Standing at the base of the staircase, dressed in the same dark, gilded attire. His mask gleamed under the faint glow of the flickering chandeliers, its expression unreadable. A rush of memories flooded her mind, the waltz, the crypt, the throne. She had escaped him once. But the cycle had brought him back. And this time, he looked almost amused. Eleanor clenched her fists. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "I won't do this again." He tilted his head. "You already are." She took a step back. "I'll find a way out." His voice was gentle, as though speaking to a child. "There is no out." The walls trembled. The clock ticked louder, pressing into her skull. The manor was shifting again. The doors behind her slammed shut. The whispering voices grew louder, overlapping into a deafening hum. And through it all, the masked man stepped forward, offering his gloved hand. Shall we begin? Chapter 16, The Masquerade of Shadows. Eleanor's breath came in ragged gasps, her mind reeling as the masked man extended his gloved hand toward her. The world around her pulsed like a living thing, the manor was awake. She clenched her fists, fighting the dizziness threatening to pull her under. She had to break the cycle. She did not take his hand. The masked man tilted his head slightly, as if he had expected her hesitation. "You always resist at first," he mused, his voice smooth, laced with something close to amusement. "And yet, you are still here." Eleanor took a step back, shaking her head. "No," she whispered. "This time is different." He did not move. "Is it?" The chandeliers above them flickered violently, casting erratic shadows across the towering walls. The manor trembled, groaning beneath some unseen force. Eleanor could feel it, the shift. The unraveling. Something was different. But something was also watching. The masked man turned his gaze upward, as if sensing it, too. "We do not have much time." Eleanor's stomach twisted. "Time for what?" A sound echoed through the vast hall, music. A waltz. Faint at first, a ghost of a melody drifting through the corridors, but then it grew. Swelling, filling every inch of the air, wrapping around her like unseen hands guiding her forward. She turned. The ballroom doors stood open. The light beyond them was golden and soft, almost inviting. But Eleanor knew better. The figures moving within the ballroom were not real. The masquerade had begun. "Don't," she whispered, but the masked man was already walking forward. "No," she said louder, stepping after him. "I won't play your game." He glanced over his shoulder, eyes gleaming behind the porcelain mask. "It is not my game, Miss Blackwood." He gestured toward the doors. "It is yours." She shook her head, but the pull of the music was strong. Her feet tingled, as if the very air itself demanded she move. She clenched her teeth, fighting against it, but the golden glow of the ballroom was already swallowing her whole. The moment she crossed the threshold, the air changed. The scent of roses and candle wax surrounded her, the wooden floor cool beneath her feet. The music enveloped her completely, threading through her veins, commanding her to join. She lifted her gaze. The ballroom was full. Dancers, elegantly dressed, their faces hidden behind elaborate masks, moved in perfect synchrony. Their laughter was warm, their steps precise, but something was wrong. Eleanor took a shaky step forward. The fabric of her dress brushed against her legs. She was wearing a gown. She gasped, hands flying to her body. The midnight blue silk wrapped around her like it belonged to her, like it had been waiting for her to return. The air in her lungs turned cold. A masked woman twirled past, her voice floating through the music. "Ah, there she is." Another dancer, his mask gilded and twisted into an eternal grin, laughed. "Finally, she's arrived." Eleanor backed away, her skin crawling. They knew her. She turned, searching for an exit, but the doors were gone. Her pulse thundered. She spun back toward the dance floor. The masked man was waiting for her. He extended his hand once more. "Shall we?" Eleanor couldn't move. The music demanded it. The manor demanded it. Her fingers trembled, but her hand lifted. She did not want to take his hand. But she already had. A gasp escaped her lips as he pulled her into the waltz, spinning her into the sea of dancers. It was happening again. The music soared. The world blurred. And Eleanor forgot. Chapter 17, The Forgotten Waltz. Eleanor's body moved in perfect rhythm with the music, yet she felt none of the grace. Her limbs were not her own. The masked man held her in a controlled waltz, guiding her through the sea of dancers that swirled around them like specters trapped in an endless dream. The chandeliers above pulsed, their golden light flickering unnaturally. The walls of the ballroom stretched, elongated, as if the space itself was distorting around her. Eleanor tried to break free, but the masked man's grip was unyielding. "Let me go," she gasped, struggling against the unseen force compelling her to move. His gloved hand tightened around hers. "You have danced this waltz before," he murmured, voice calm, too calm. "Why resist what is already written?" Eleanor's pulse thundered. "I don't remember." "You always say that." The music swelled, and suddenly her memories cracked open like a door left ajar. Flashes of past waltzes surged through her mind. 100 versions of herself, dancing, spinning, laughing, crying. She had been here before. So many times. She had danced with him. Terror surged through her veins, but before she could react, the ballroom lurched. The floor beneath them tilted, sending Eleanor stumbling. The masked man remained steady, anchoring her in place, but the other dancers began to change. Their laughter turned hollow, their movements too fluid, too unnatural. Eleanor's eyes widened in horror as the masks on their faces began to crack. Beneath the splintering porcelain were not faces, but black voids, empty, endless. The waltz did not stop. Eleanor tried to pull away, but the masked man only held her closer. "You cannot stop the dance, Eleanor." His voice was a murmur against her ear. "You never have." Her stomach twisted as she glanced at the mirrors lining the ballroom. In them, she saw herself as she was meant to be. Not a dancer. Not a guest. A host. She was the center of the masquerade. The one who had invited them all. Her breath hitched. "No," she whispered. "That's not." The mirrors shattered all at once. The ballroom imploded. The dancers collapsed into dust, vanishing as the chandeliers flickered violently overhead. The masked man did not let her go as the manor's walls cracked apart, revealing the abyss that lay beneath it. Eleanor gasped, twisting in his grasp. "What is this?" His masked face tilted. "You are waking up." She struggled harder, fighting against the weight of truth, of memory, of the force that bound her here. "I don't belong here." His grip slackened. "Just slightly." "Then why do you always come back?" The words hit her like a blow to the chest. "Because she did. She always had. This was never the first time. And unless she did something different, it would not be the last." Summoning every ounce of strength she had left, Eleanor wrenched herself free from his grasp. The moment their hands separated, the world around them fractured. The abyss below roared to life. The masked man did not move to stop her. Instead, he simply tilted his head once more, as if watching her with something almost like sorrow. "Run, then," he murmured. "If you still think you can." The ballroom collapsed. Eleanor turned and ran. The walls peeled away, the golden glow of the chandeliers dimming as darkness swallowed the space. The air grew thick, heavy, pulling at her legs, trying to drag her back. She would not go back. A door appeared ahead, one she had never seen before. She lunged for it, grasping the handle as the world behind her caved in. The masked man stood amidst the wreckage, unmoving, watching her go. Eleanor yanked the door open. And stepped through. Into the unknown. Chapter 18, The Threshold of Midnight. Eleanor tumbled forward, landing hard on what felt like cold stone. The door slammed shut behind her, its echo rolling through the vast emptiness ahead. She gasped for breath, her chest rising and falling with frantic urgency. She had escaped. Or had she? The space around her was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of old parchment, melted wax, and something deeper, something ancient. The sound of dripping water echoed in the distance, reverberating through the massive chamber. The walls stretched impossibly high, disappearing into darkness. Bookshelves lined every inch of the space, their towering spines older than time itself. She had never been here before. Or had she? A massive, circular table sat at the heart of the room, carved from a single slab of obsidian. Its surface was covered in symbols she could not read, yet they stirred something inside her. A low hum vibrated through the floor. The sigils on the table pulsed with faint silver light. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. Not the masked man. Not a ghostly dancer. But a woman. Tall, draped in deep midnight robes, her face hidden beneath a hood. Her presence was different from anything Eleanor had encountered in Ravenshade Manor, not haunting, but heavy with purpose. The woman stepped closer, her voice soft yet commanding. "You made it further than before." Eleanor's breath hitched. "What?" A pause. Then the woman lifted her hands, her fingers hovering over the sigils on the table. They responded, glowing brighter, twisting and shifting as if whispering back to her. Eleanor's pulse pounded. "Who are you?" The woman finally lifted her head. And Eleanor saw herself. Not the hollow-eyed doppelganger from the mirror. Not a ghostly reflection from the waltz. But her. Older. Sharper. Changed. Eleanor's legs threatened to give way beneath her. "No. No, this isn't." The other Eleanor held up a hand. "You don't remember yet. But you will." The sigils on the table pulsed again, and suddenly. Eleanor remembered. Flashes of lives, of choices made and unmade. Versions of herself that had reached this place before. Each time, she had fought to break free. Each time, she had come here thinking she was escaping. And each time, she had failed. Because this was where the truth began. Eleanor staggered backward. "I'm still trapped." The other Eleanor tilted her head, her gaze steady. "You were never trapped. You were searching." Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest. For what? A slow, knowing smile. The way out. A cold shiver ran through Eleanor's spine. "You mean I can leave?" The woman's gaze darkened. "If you are ready to pay the price." The pulsing symbols on the table flickered. The chamber shook. The weight of time itself pressed against Eleanor's bones. The price. Her breath came quick. "What is it?" The other Eleanor lifted her hand, gesturing toward the space behind her. A second door had appeared, tall, impossibly black, its surface rippling like the night sky. The moment Eleanor laid eyes on it, a deep knowing settled in her chest. She could leave. But if she did, she would never remember. Not Ravenshade Manor. Not the masquerade. Not the waltz, nor the whispers, nor the truth she had clawed her way toward. She would wake in a new life, a new world, never knowing what she had left behind. The weight of it pressed into her skull. Did she want to remember? She looked at the woman, herself. A version of her who had clearly once made this choice. "Did you leave?" Eleanor asked. The other Eleanor smiled. "Not yet." Eleanor exhaled, hands shaking. She had fought so hard to get here. But now, she had to ask herself the hardest question of all. Was it better to remember and stay, or to forget and be free? The door loomed before her. And time was running out. Chapter 19, The Price of Memory. The chamber seemed to shrink around Eleanor, its walls pressing inward as the weight of her choice loomed. The two doors before her, the swirling abyss of memory, the black void of forgetting, offered no mercy, only the stark reality of sacrifice. The other Eleanor watched her in silence, her expression unreadable, but Eleanor could feel the unspoken dread between them. If I leave, Eleanor whispered, her voice trembling, I lose everything. The other Eleanor inclined her head slightly. You lose this. Her gaze swept across the ancient chamber, the table pulsing with its forgotten knowledge, the towering bookshelves filled with secrets Eleanor had barely begun to understand. You lose the truth. Eleanor's fingers curled into fists. But I'll be free. A pause. Then the other Eleanor sighed. Free of knowing. Eleanor swallowed, her pulse a frantic rhythm against her ribs. And if I stay? The other Eleanor's voice softened. You will remember. A shudder rolled through Eleanor's body. The price was clear, her past or her future. She could abandon this world, awaken somewhere new, and live a life untouched by Ravenshade Manor. But it would mean severing the thread of every life she had lived before, of every step that had led her to this moment. Or she could stay. Keep the truth. But never escape. Her mind rebelled against both choices. Was this why she had always returned? Because she had never been able to decide? The other Eleanor stepped closer. There is one more thing you must understand. Eleanor met her gaze. What? The other Eleanor hesitated, then murmured, if you leave, I stay. Eleanor's breath hitched. What? A slow nod. One of us must remain. The other Eleanor's voice was calm, but there was something fractured beneath the words, something heavy with unspoken agony. The cycle does not break, Eleanor. It only shifts. The weight of it crashed over her, sharp as ice. This was not just about her escape. It was about the part of her that would be left behind. The part that would remember. The part that would still wake in Ravenshade Manor, hearing the ticking of the clock, the whispers of the waltz, the pull of the past that would never let go. Eleanor's breath came in sharp, uneven bursts. I don't want to leave you behind. The other Eleanor offered a sad smile. You already have. Again and again. The truth settled deep in Eleanor's bones. She had chosen before. And every time she had left behind a version of herself. The waltz. The masked man. The shifting corridors. It was all her. Her own mind, her own prison, twisting itself into an endless loop, keeping her here. Her throat tightened. Then what happens if I stay? The other Eleanor's gaze was unreadable. Then I leave. Eleanor's head spun. The cycle, could it truly be broken? Could they switch places? The black door loomed before her, its surface shifting like liquid shadow. The memories of her past selves clawed at her, urging her to choose what she had never dared to before. She inhaled deeply, the decision forming on her lips. And then. She stepped forward. Chapter 20, Breaking the Cycle. Eleanor stepped forward. The chamber pulsed with unseen energy, the air thick with the weight of infinite pasts colliding into a single moment. The black door shimmered before her, its surface fluid and restless, a void of possibility. Behind her, the other Eleanor remained motionless, watching, waiting. I will remember, Eleanor said, her voice firmer now. She had decided. The other Eleanor inclined her head. Then I will leave. A shift in the air. The sigils carved into the table flared with silver fire, the walls of the chamber trembling, as if the very foundation of Ravenshade Manor was changing. The black door shuddered. Eleanor took another step, her fingers outstretched toward the swirling void. A cold touch grazed her fingertips, sending a jolt through her veins. It felt like stepping into something alive. A whisper curled through the space. The clock is still ticking. The masked man's voice. Eleanor stiffened, turning sharply. He was there, standing at the far end of the chamber. Not an illusion. Not a memory. His porcelain mask gleamed under the ethereal light, his presence commanding as ever. She narrowed her eyes. "You can't stop me." He tilted his head. "I wouldn't dream of it." A pause. Then, he added, "But do you truly understand what you've chosen?" Eleanor clenched her fists. "I break the cycle." The masked man took a slow step forward. "You shifted." A wave of unease rolled through her. "What does that mean?" His voice was impossibly soft. "It means that you and I will change places." Eleanor's breath caught. She turned back to the other Eleanor, but she was fading, her form unraveling like mist. "Wait." Eleanor reached for her, but her fingers grasped only empty air. The other Eleanor smiled, and disappeared. A violent chime rang out. The chamber trembled. The obsidian table cracked down the middle, the glowing sigils bursting into embers. The entire space fractured, the walls peeling away into endless darkness. Eleanor gasped, her hands flying to her ears. The sound of the grandfather clock was deafening. Tick. 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 She stumbled backward, into the masked man's waiting arms. Her body went rigid. "No." His fingers ghosted over her wrist. "Your time here is over, Eleanor." Her heart pounded. "What happens to you?" A pause. "What always happens." The black door behind her collapsed. The masked man's grip on her tightened, and the world tilted. Eleanor screamed. And everything went dark. She woke up gasping. Not in Ravenshade Manor. Not in the endless corridors of time. But in a small, quiet apartment. Morning sunlight trickled through the curtains, dust particles drifting lazily in the air. The scent of fresh coffee lingered, the low hum of a city just beyond the walls. She bolted upright, her breath sharp and uneven. It was over. Her fingers trembled as she looked down at them. No bruises. No lingering shadows. Just skin. Just herself. She turned toward the bedside table. And froze. A single black mask rested there, gleaming under the morning light. Eleanor's blood ran cold. She reached out, her fingers brushing over the cool surface of porcelain. And in the distance, so faint it could almost be imagined. The ticking of a clock. Epilogue: Echoes of Midnight. The black mask lay in Eleanor's trembling hands, its smooth porcelain surface catching the golden morning light. Her breath hitched as she traced her fingers along the delicate curves, feeling the lingering coldness that had no place in the warmth of this new world. She was free. Wasn't she? The steady hum of the city outside her window should have been comforting, but beneath it, beneath the quiet rhythm of normalcy, she heard it. A whisper. A tick. It came not from the clock on her wall, but from somewhere deeper, older. A sound that resonated in the marrow of her bones, a haunting rhythm that had once dictated her existence. She turned sharply, scanning the room. There was nothing there. And yet, something had changed. She stood abruptly, the mask clutched against her chest. The walls of her apartment, plain and unassuming only moments ago, seemed too smooth, too symmetrical. The air felt thicker. Eleanor stepped toward the window, throwing it open. The city stretched before her, cars humming along the streets, people moving as though this world had never known Ravenshade Manor. But when she looked at the glass pane, at her own reflection, her heart stopped. She wasn't alone. A figure stood behind her, just beyond the reach of the light. A silhouette draped in shadows, its features hidden beneath an ornate mask of black and gold. Eleanor spun around. Nothing. Her pulse pounded as she turned back to the glass. The reflection remained. The masked man was watching her. Waiting. The mask in her hands grew heavier. She staggered backward, her mind reeling. This wasn't real. She had left. She had won. Hadn't she? A breath of air whispered against her ear. A voice, his voice, low, smooth, patient. It was never about winning. Eleanor's body turned cold. She clenched her jaw. I broke the cycle. Silence. Then. Did you? The city outside blurred. The apartment walls shifted. The ticking grew louder, its rhythm burrowing into her thoughts. She shut her eyes, gripping the mask tighter. No. This wasn't happening. This wasn't real. But the air around her grew thick with the scent of candle wax and old velvet, of dust and forgotten time. And when she opened her eyes, she was no longer in her apartment. She was standing in the grand hall of Ravenshade Manor. A single candle flickered in the distance. The scent of roses, long dead and preserved in time, filled her lungs. The polished floor beneath her feet gleamed in the dim glow of the chandeliers overhead. And in the distance, through the endless corridor of shifting walls and phantom whispers, the grandfather clock stood waiting. Its hands were moving. Backward. A slow smile curled upon the lips of the masked man standing at the base of the staircase. His head tilted, his golden eyes gleaming beneath the porcelain mask. Welcome home, Miss Blackwood. The clock struck midnight. And the waltz began again.
Every story has an ending, but some mysteries live on. If you enjoyed this tale, don't let it fade into the shadows. Smash that like button and subscribe for more thrilling stories that will transport you beyond the veil of the ordinary. Subscribe to our channel and your name will appear at the beginning of our next video, where we will pleasantly thank you for your subscribing. Tap the bell icon so you never miss a journey into the unknown. Share your thoughts in the comments. What twists did you see coming? And what secrets do you think still remain? Until next time, stay curious, stay brave, and let the next story begin.